Hello everyone! Along with the release of Sandrone in patch Luna 8, HOYOVerse is also buffing 7 older characters: Yae, Cyno, Wriothesley, Qiqi, Beidou, Diona, and Mizuki. I initially thought that these buffs would be relatively minor, but there are some very impactful changes that both buffs their older gameplay and drastically changes the role of these older characters to synergize with the upcoming new reaction, Stellar Conduct. So I wanted to quickly go over what all these new buffs for the older characters are. Not going to go full in depth with a ton of details since it is still very early in the beta and things can change, such as for one of the characters that already got the nerf hammer in the second week of beta, but I wanted to highlight the key changes here to give you all a better understanding of what's going on at the moment. Most of the changes I will show for each character were nicely compiled by the Renegade 468 via JStern mains. Before we talk about the actual buffs, it is important to realize one thing. While there are plenty of changes to the character's base kits, for almost all of the buffed characters, the majority of their buffs are tied to the character entering something called the Radiant Stellar Conduct state. This special state can only be activated if the team is able to trigger the next upcoming reaction, Stellar Conduct. And in the patch that the buffs are going to be released in, the only character that can enable you to trigger Stellar Conduct is Sandrone. So for the majority of these upcoming buffs, you need to have Sandrone specifically on the team. Or you have to wait for another character that will release in Snezhnaya that will also enable the use of Stellar Conduct. So the next question is, what is Stellar Conduct? Stellar Conduct is the stellar reaction variant of Superconduct, which is Cryo plus Electro. Stellar reactions will be the main mechanic likely defining the Snezhnaya patches. Just like how all the lunar reactions work, if you want to enable the team to trigger Stellar Conduct instead of normal Superconduct when applying Cryo and Electro on an enemy, you'll need to have one character on the team with a passive that enables you to do this. In patch Luna 8, this character will be Sandrone. Now, triggering normal Superconduct gave you AoE cryo damage and 40% physical red shred to enemies hit by this AoE for 12 seconds. But Stellar Conduct is very different. Triggering Stellar Conduct does not deal any reaction damage, but instead creates a large field called a Pole Star Field for 6 seconds, and triggering Stellar Conduct again will refresh this duration. While you're in this Pole Star Field, characters will enter the Radiant Stellar Conduct state, which empowers their kits to deal more damage and enable passive buffs. Additionally, while the field exists, it provides the team damage buffs. Enemies in the field will have their physical red shred reduced by 40%, maintaining the effect of normal Superconduct, and the field gives the team a Cryo, Electro, and Stellar Conduct damage buff, scaling with how often you hit enemies with Cryo and Electro attacks within a 3-second period. While the field is active, it will track the total amount of Cryo and Electro hits done to enemies by your entire party. Each hit gives you 1 stack, and the amount of stacks will determine the damage buff you get for 3 seconds up to a max of 10. This incentivizes a team with Cryo and Electro characters that have all field presence, so that you can consistently maintain a high number of stacks, ideally 10, while your main DPS is on field. The buff is just regular damage percent for Cryo and Electro damage, but for Stellar Conduct damage, it instead gives a unique multiplier that goes into the Stellar base multiplier section of its damage formula. Since the Stellar Conduct reaction itself deals no damage, all Stellar Conduct damage is direct, meaning it comes from character abilities. Now if we compare this formula to the direct lunar crystallized damage formula, you'll notice that the formula structures are the exact same. This means that Stellar reaction damage works the exact same way as lunar reaction damage, so it's affected by the abilities multiplier, the base reaction damage buff from character passives, elemental mastery, Stellar reaction damage bonus but not elemental damage bonus, enemy elemental res but not their defense, elevation, and lastly the character's crit stats. With Stellar Conduct explained, let's go over the actual character kit changes, starting with Yae. When you have 3 of Yae's turrets on the field already and you use her skill again, on top of refreshing the duration, she'll do additional electro damage, and if you're in the Stellar Conduct field, this damage will be Stellar Conduct damage. A newly added passive increases Yae's turret duration by 10 seconds. In addition, when the team triggers Superconduct or Stellar Conduct, Yae's next turret attack will deal additional damage, having a 2.5 second cooldown. If you're in the Stellar Conduct domain, this will cause another instance of damage that is considered Stellar Conduct damage. In the first week of beta, the timings for this passive made it so that Yae wasn't able to get these Stellar Conduct hits on each wave of her 3 turret attacks, but this was most recently fixed in version 2 of the beta, so now in Stellar Conduct teams, Yae does consistent off-field Stellar Conduct damage, having doubled the damage instances that was initially assumed, as long as she has a consistent Cryo aura, making her a very strong sub DPS. Lastly, Yae's burst now just does damage, it doesn't destroy the turrets anymore, which is great. Her burst still doesn't seem worth to use since it doesn't do Stellar Conduct damage, but at least it doesn't force you to use 3 skills again, which can be more relevant in non-Stellar Conduct teams, and the burst does get better with Constellations, which also got some new additions. Along with their original effects, C1 now gives 40% Electro and Stellar Conduct damage after she triggers Superconduct or Stellar Conduct, or does Stellar Conduct damage herself. C2 now also gives an EM buff to Yae and the on-field character based on her turret level. C4 gives more energy and increases her burst damage, and C6 additionally increases Yae's Stellar Conduct crit damage. Build-wise, in specifically Stellar Conduct teams, the new set 4-piece 4-piece Disenchantment currently looks slightly better than 4-piece Golden Troop because Yae does slightly more stellar contact damage compared to regular electro damage in her current state, but a good Golden Troop set that you already have should be fine. But more importantly, Yae wants double attack main stats or EM and attack main stats in stellar contact teams. Electro damage Goblet does not buff stellar contact damage. Teams wise, other than her previous teams like Overload or Dendro which do get improved, her main new role will be a sub DPS in stellar contact teams, and in this role she currently looks very strong because of her off-field damage and buffing capabilities with her early constellations, and Yae is one of the characters you can pick a free constellation for at the moment. She is very important to stellar contact teams in her current state, and without her, these teams don't look to be as strong. Also, with Yae C2 giving EM, she can serve as a generic EM buffer such as in a Nefer team. Currently she does look better than Nahida, but likely won't be a highly optimized Sucrose or C2 Nilu, especially with vertical investment into your Nefer. Next, we have Cyno. The main changes in his base kit are 1. Using his normal skill outside his burst mode actually puts him into his burst mode for 6 seconds where he can access 1 enhanced skill, which makes him a little less burst reliant and allows him to play a more quick swap gameplay style. And 2. While in the stellar contact field, his enhanced skills deal additional stellar contact damage. Now here is where the unfortunate bad news lies for Cyno. Initially, this 600% EM scaling was confirmed to be motion value via data mining, but with the second week of beta, this was changed to be a quill. In simple terms, this EM scaling as a quill loses a ton of multipliers, becoming around 1/6 the value as it was originally. And this is the sole reason why Cyno's damage was drastically nerfed and a lot of people were talking about it. For constellations, while in the stellar contact field, when Cyno is in his burst mode, he'll gain 200 EM, and if he swaps into another character while his burst mode is still active, he can transfer his EM buff for the remaining duration, which is a very unique way to promote a quick swap dual DPS gameplay style. C2 gives additional stacking stellar contact damage %, maximum of 5 stacks, when characters that are buffed by Cyno's C1 EM buff hit enemies with their normal attacks. C4 gives Cyno more energy when a character buffed by his C1 EM buff, excluding himself, triggers an electro reaction, and if Cyno is buffed by his C1 EM buff, his C6 will proc additional stellar contact hits. Builds wise, in stellar contact teams, he wants to use the new set and also doesn't want electro damage Goblet, but 1 EM and 1 attack main stat. And for teams, aside from his previous Dendro related teams which he can still play in, he can now play in stellar contact teams with Sandrone, either as a dual carry or just by ignoring Sandrone altogether until a new support releases. Unfortunately, because of Cyno's nerf, he's not in a good state right now. It's not an exaggeration to say his team DPS where he was the central carry was cut in half with the version 2 changes, making those teams not much better than his current aggravate teams. So he's not in the best spot right now, but remember we're still early in the beta. For Wriothesley, while he's in the stellar field, his new stellar contact related passive will replace his current A1 passive. He will still keep his enhanced charge attack activated when he's under 60% HP that heals him, with this healing having a 2-second cooldown instead, but additionally, it makes his N3, N5, and his enhanced charge attack deal stellar contact damage and increases Wriothesley's stellar contact damage. While in the stellar contact field, C1 increases the damage of his charge attack after his N5, and then vice versa. You can also extend his enhanced state once by 4 seconds after using his enhanced charge attack. If this new C1 is active, you don't get the old C1 effect. The new addition to C2 basically just buffs all the stellar contact oriented things in his new passive, including his N3, N5, and his enhanced charge attacks that deal stellar contact damage, but it also does increase his regular normal attack and charge attack damage as well. C4 gives Wriothesley 25% damage reduction instead of increased healing while in the stellar contact field, while also keeping the attack speed buffs, and C6 keeps the original crit buffs from the original effect while in the stellar contact field, but it also makes his N5 and charge attack generate an additional attack that deals stellar contact damage. Interestingly, Wriothesley's buff design are kind of designed to be split between his regular playstyle and his stellar contact playstyle rather than just all the effects being added together. There's also definitely some changes to Wriothesley's combos with these changes in stellar contact teams, mainly incentivizing performing his whole normal attack chain N5, but I think it's best to wait for people to rotation craft his combos and perform actual testing before reaching a proper conclusion on this. Builds wise for a stellar contact team, again, new set and no cryo damage Goblet. Attack or attack EM main stats both look viable. And for new teams, he's in a bit of an awkward spot because he needs to fit in Sandrone, but otherwise the team functions and he looks fine with the buffs, but is definitely wanting a new stellar contact support to fill Sandrone's slot. Next, we have Qiqi, who is getting an incredible glow up compared to her previous kit. Her skill, Herald of Frost, now has a permanent 15-second lower cooldown. It fires coordinated attacks when the active character hits enemies, which enables her to have off-field cryo application, and it finally generates energy particles. In addition, while in the stellar contact field, she can easily apply her burst mark with her normal and charge attacks at a reduced cooldown. Her burst will deal direct stellar contact damage, and while her skill is active, the team's super conduct, stellar conduct, and cryo swirl reaction damage will be increased by 50%, With C1, while in the stellar contact field, Qiqi gains energy whenever her skill hits an enemy. C2 gives Qiqi 50% attack while in the stellar contact field. C4 gives her burst effect more healing to the lowest HP teammate. And with C6, Qiqi's burst gives 4 quill buffs that increases stellar contact damage at the team, scaling with her attack, which is her best new constellation for damage gain. Builds wise, because her skill now has off-field cryo application, she's an excellent holder of tenacity of the millilith for the attack buff. Noblesse is also useful if you burst on Qiqi every rotation, which currently is mainly for C6 Qiqi. She still goes a regular support build in terms of stats, but if you do have C6, you definitely want to go full attack to increase her quills. Teams wise, she is now an excellent support for stellar contact teams for her team buffs, off-field cryo application, and healing. For example, she can be the main off-field cryo character, or the second cryo support for a Sandrone team, and in both cases, she seems very solid, being one of Sandrone's best cryo supports and the clear best choice if you have her C6. Now let's cover the two 4-stars getting buffed, Beidou and Diona. Both of them just got a couple of changes. For Beidou, holding her skill increases its damage dealt, restores additional energy, and reduces its cooldown. And with her C6, her burst will additionally give 15% cryo res shred and 200 EM to the active character while in the stellar contact field. Also, her res shred range was increased to 5 meters, which equates to 2 abyss tiles. For Diona, her skill will now periodically trigger cryo coordinated attacks every 3.5 seconds when the party triggers super conduct, stellar conduct, or cryo swirl reactions. And with her C6, Diona gets 25% HP, and characters in her burst field will deal 40% increased super conduct, stellar conduct, and cryo swirl reaction damage. For builds, not much has changed stats wise other than potential artifact sets. For Beidou, she likes to be in a more supportive role in stellar conduct teams, so you can go 4-piece Noblesse. Emblem is okay, but she doesn't deal that much damage. With Diona's new off-field cryo application, she is also a good user of tenacity of the millilith, but can also use 4-piece Noblesse as well. Teams wise, Beidou and Diona both fit the off-field support role in stellar conduct teams and can fit if needed. Generally, however, they are worse than the 5-star supports like Yae and Qiqi, but they will be serviceable if you don't have them. Lastly, we have Mizuki. Mizuki is the only character getting buffed that does not have any stellar conduct related things in the new additions. While in her skill state, after triggering Swirl, the next skill hit will deal additional animo damage scaling with her EM. She now also gives the entire team 10% of her own EM while in her skill state. In terms of constellations, C1 adds an additional animo damage proc, her C2 now also gives 20% elemental res shred on top of the elemental damage bonus buff, C4 now gives additional healing to the lowest HP teammate, and C6 now gives Mizuki herself crit rate and crit damage as well. Since all the buffs were just to her main kit in her original team archetype, she doesn't have any different builds or teams. She just got better as an animo driver. Now the main purpose of these buffs could just be to make her better in her current state, so that she's finally better than a character like Aoife for example, but it could also be in preparation for Stellar Swirl, which is currently being hinted at with the addition of specifically Cryo Swirl in Diona's and Qiqi's buffs for instance. And that's everything on the upcoming character buffs as of now. As of version 2 of the beta, here is how I would rank how good each of the buffs currently are. Yae is by far the best buff character. Considering you can also pick up her C1 for free, she is a very strong sub DPS and buffer for stellar conduct teams, such as for Sandrone. She's so strong at the moment that if she stays in her current state, there's a good chance that she remains best in slot for Sandrone teams even with newer characters releasing as Snezhnaya. So I wouldn't be surprised if she gets nerfed. Qiqi is also up there, mainly because she just wasn't a useful character before her buffs. But with these changes, she's actually good in stellar conduct teams, especially with high constellations. She most likely gets replaced by newer characters, but considering where Qiqi was before the buffs are amazing for her. Then we have Wriothesley. His buffs are good, he's just kind of a worse Sandrone as a cryo stellar conduct DPS, and his team building is currently awkward, but that doesn't make him a bad character, as his stellar conduct teams look fine even with Sandrone just being on the team and not really doing anything, and he will definitely get better with newer characters that also enable stellar conduct. Then we have the 4-stars. C6 Beidou and C6 Diona are decent stellar conduct supports, but they are just generally worse than Yae and Qiqi at the moment. They will be the first characters that you would want to replace in stellar conduct teams, but they do serve their purpose well as 4-star support alternatives for stellar conduct teams. Lastly, we have Cyno and Mizuki. With his passive change being from motion value to quills, Cyno's buffs became a lot worse, to the point where his new stellar conduct teams aren't even much better than his Dendro teams, which are currently not very good. Because of this, I do expect Cyno to get some positive changes in the upcoming beta cycles. As for Mizuki, her buffs only make her better in her current niche, but they don't really give her anything new. I do think that there is a chance that her buffs are in preparation for the potential new Stellar Swirl reaction, which is likely going to be added because of the addition of Cryo Swirl to some of these upcoming character buffs. So that is my current ranking on these buffs. But of course, remember that beta changes are still very likely to happen, and we won't really know the true strength of these character buffs until new characters are released in Snezhnaya. We are very likely to get new Stellar Conduct supports, and they will very likely change team building, builds options, etc. depending on what they do. So we'll just have to wait and see how everything shapes up in Naya. I hope this quick rundown on the upcoming character buffs was helpful to you all. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, or sub to the channel if you enjoyed. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.